Marcus Johnson, a 54-year-old African-American senior systems analyst at NexTech Solutions, sat at his desk in a quiet, isolated corner of the office. He had spent the last 20 years building the very infrastructure that the company now relied on, from its early days in the tech industry to its cutting-edge innovations in cloud services. Yet, today, he sat there feeling a gnawing sense of dread. He had received a brief, cryptic message from his supervisor, Richard Saunders, requesting him to come to a meeting. It wasn't unusual for him to meet with Richard, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air that day. When Marcus walked into Richard's office, he found the new CEO seated behind a polished mahogany desk, his posture rigid and formal. Richard, a man in his mid-40s with sharp features and an air of condescension, barely looked up from his tablet as Marcus entered. Sitting next to Richard was Karen Miller, the HR manager, whose disinterested gaze met Marcus with a cold, calculating stare. Both of them were in the midst of a discussion, which abruptly stopped when Marcus entered. Marcus," Richard said, his voice cold and unfeeling. "Please, have a seat. We've got some business to discuss." Marcus lowered himself into the chair across from them, trying to mask the unease that was creeping into his chest. He had been at NexTech since the very beginning, watching the company grow from a small startup into a major player in the tech world. He had given his all to the company, working late nights, weekends, and holidays to ensure that the systems ran smoothly. But now, it seemed like that loyalty meant nothing. Richard didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We've reviewed your performance, Marcus, and unfortunately, we've decided to eliminate your position here at NexTech. Your department is being restructured. We've decided to streamline things, and, well, you're no longer needed." He said it in such a way that it felt like a simple, cold decision with no consideration for Marcus' years of hard work. Marcus blinked, unable to find the words at first. He had anticipated some sort of change, new management, new directions, but he had never imagined this. I don't understand," he said, his voice low. "I've been with this company for over 20 years. I've seen it all. I've helped build it up. How can you just—" "It's a new era, Marcus," Richard interrupted, his tone dismissive. "We need people who are forward-thinking, who are agile and can keep up with the modern demands of the tech industry. The systems you've built, while important in the past, are now outdated. We need to move forward with fresh ideas." Karen Miller, sitting quietly beside Richard, chimed in. "This decision is final. The company needs younger, more adaptable talent. No offense, but your skill set just doesn't match the direction we're taking now." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He could feel the subtle but unmistakable sting of ageism creeping into their words. This wasn't just about restructuring or modernizing. It was about pushing someone out simply because of his age. But it wasn't just age that Marcus felt in the air. It was the unspoken bias, the assumption that because he was older and African-American, he didn't belong in this new streamlined company. "You've been here long enough to understand the direction the company's going," Richard said, leaning back in his chair, almost as if he was waiting for Marcus to accept the decision without question. "You should be happy that you're getting a severance package, Marcus. We're being generous." Generous. The word echoed in Marcus' mind, bitter and hollow. Generous didn't seem like the right word for an unjust decision, especially one that came with such cold detachment. He had worked his entire adult life to help this company grow, and now he was nothing more than a casualty of their corporate strategy. "What about the projects I'm still working on? The systems I built that no one else understands?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What happens to all of that?" Richard's lips twitched into a thin smile. "We'll figure it out. Don't worry. The new team will handle it. As I said, it's a new era. You're just out of touch with where we're going. That's all." Marcus felt his heart drop. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but instead, he sat there in silence, the weight of their words settling over him. The company he had helped build had cast him aside like an old tool, no longer useful once its purpose had been served. Karen, who had been quiet up until now, glanced at her watch impatiently. "You'll have the rest of the day to pack up your things, Marcus. Please make sure you clear out your desk by the end of the day. We'll have HR handle the rest." Marcus stood up, his mind racing, but he said nothing more. He turned and walked out of the office, his footsteps heavy with the realization of what had just transpired. As he walked back to his desk, he noticed the younger employees glancing at him, some whispering behind their hands, others pretending not to notice. He had trained most of them, but they had no idea what it had taken to keep the company running smoothly. They didn't understand the systems he had built, the software he had created, or the countless hours he had spent ensuring everything worked without fail. As Marcus began packing his personal belongings, family photos, his favorite coffee mug, the small cactus that had somehow survived 17 years under the fluorescent lights, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was no farewell, no recognition for his years of service, just an abrupt dismissal. The thought gnawed at him. Bethany, a marketing associate, stopped by his desk, her face full of concern. "Marcus, I just heard. This is ridiculous. You practically built this place. How can they just—" He held up a hand, stopping her. "It's fine, Bethany. Really. But it wasn't fine. Not at all. There was something deeper at play here, something Marcus couldn't ignore. He had been pushed aside, not just because of his age, but because of who he was. A quiet, determined man who had been loyal to the company for far too long. Marcus packed up the last of his things and walked out of the office, the building that had been his home for so many years now feeling like a distant memory. As he exited through the revolving doors, he glanced back one last time. There was no grand farewell, no recognition of his contributions, just the cold emptiness of a company that had discarded him. But Marcus knew that this wasn't the end of his story. He had been cast aside, yes, but he would find a way to get his redemption. And justice would come. It always did. After Marcus left the office, his mind was a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and disbelief. He had always been loyal to NexTech Solutions, working countless hours to ensure everything ran smoothly. He had been a trusted figure in the company, and yet, here he was, shown the door without a second thought. His years of dedication and hard work, wiped away with a few cold words from Richard Saunders and Karen Miller. As he drove home, the hum of the car engine did little to ease the tension building in his chest. He glanced out at the busy streets of Atlanta, the city he had called home for so long, and tried to shake off the feeling of betrayal. His mind kept going back to what Richard had said, that he was out of touch with where the company was headed. It stung. He had helped build the infrastructure that had made NexTech one of the leading companies in its field. He had been the one to ensure that their data was secure, that their systems were optimized. And now he was no longer needed? When Marcus walked through the door of his home, his wife, Carmen, immediately saw the look on his face. Her eyes softened, and she stepped forward to take his coat. "What happened?" she asked gently, already knowing that something was wrong. "They let me go," Marcus replied, his voice hoarse. "Just like that. No warning, no thanks for all the years I put in. They say it's restructuring." Carmen shook her head, disbelief written all over her face. "That's ridiculous, Marcus. You've been with them for 20 years. How can they do this to you?" He shrugged, still trying to make sense of it all. "I don't know, but it doesn't feel right. It's like they were waiting for an excuse to get rid of me. I'm older, and I guess I'm not the new blood they want. They've been bringing in younger employees for months now, and now I'm out." Carmen took a deep breath, her anger rising. "This isn't about you not being capable. This is about them not wanting to pay respect to what you've done. It's about them pushing you out because you're not part of their new vision, because you're a black man of your age. They don't value you, Marcus. You've always been more than just a number to them, but they can't see that." Marcus didn't respond right away. Carmen was right. There was something more to it. His age had made him a target, but his race, too, was something he couldn't ignore. As much as he had hoped things had changed, deep down, he had always known that the corporate world had its biases. He had worked harder than anyone in the office, and yet the respect had never truly been there, not in the way it was for others. He sat down on the couch, his thoughts racing. He had always felt the subtle sting of discrimination, the way people overlooked him, spoke over him, and undermined his contributions. But this felt different. Richard Saunders and Karen Miller didn't even pretend to care about the years of work he'd put in. They had brushed him aside, like he was nothing more than an outdated piece of equipment that had served its purpose. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man to back down easily. He had faced adversity his entire life. He knew that this was just one more obstacle to overcome. "Do you want me to call someone? Maybe talk to a lawyer?" Carmen asked, her voice full of concern. Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I can't just sit here and do nothing. There's more to this than just getting fired." The next day, Marcus returned to the NexTech building, but not to walk back into his office. Instead, he went in his car, parked a few blocks away, and sat in the parking lot, staring up at the 12-story building. The familiar hum of the air conditioning, The soft glow of fluorescent lights in the windows, it all felt so distant now. He had spent the better part of his life in that building, and yet it had become a place of emptiness. Marcus didn't know what he was looking for exactly, but something deep inside told him that there was more going on here. He had spent so much time managing the company's systems, maintaining security protocols, overseeing data transfers, that he knew every corner of that company's infrastructure. And something about the way the systems were being run, the way things were changing, didn't sit right with him. His instincts as a systems analyst kicked in. Over the years, he had built custom software, secure audit protocols, and tracking systems that no one else seemed to pay attention to. As the days passed, Marcus went through old records, doing what he had always done best, digging into the numbers. There were discrepancies, small at first, but growing steadily. Unauthorized access to company accounts, unusual data transfers to vendors he didn't recognize, and changes to internal systems that seemed out of place. He took notes, kept copies of everything, and kept his suspicions to himself. But his gut told him that this wasn't just a case of corporate restructuring. There was something bigger at play, something they didn't want him to see. By the end of the week, Marcus had gathered enough information to know that something was wrong. He found that payments were being made to Crest Consulting, a vendor that had started working with NexTech just months before. Their fees were inflated, and the billing wasn't adding up. At first glance, the payments seemed legitimate, but Marcus' experience told him otherwise. His attention to detail, the same skill that had helped him build NexTech's infrastructure, was now his weapon against the fraud unfolding before him. But Marcus wasn't about to expose the truth in a hasty move. He needed more. His mind worked like a machine, each click of the keyboard, each line of data, bringing him closer to the truth. He wasn't just going to let this go. Not after everything he had given to the company. He had been pushed out, but he would make sure the truth came to light. It was time to fight back, not with anger, but with the quiet determination that had always defined him. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by piles of paperwork, his laptop open in front of him. It had been a week since he was fired from NexTech Solutions, and though the anger that had initially flared within him had dulled somewhat, a quiet determination had replaced it. Marcus wasn't the type to lash out or burn bridges in the heat of the moment. Instead, he bided his time, waiting for the right moment to act, knowing that the truth had a way of revealing itself. As the days passed, his investigation into the strange financial transactions at NexTech had deepened. He had spent hours poring over old records, carefully cataloging the irregularities he had found. There were payments to a vendor called Crest Consulting, and while on the surface, it appeared to be legitimate, something about the numbers didn't add up. The invoices were inflated by as much as 20%, and the payments started small, but over time, they had grown exponentially. That wasn't the only red flag. Marcus had a knack for spotting the subtle signs of fraud, and this was no different. There were trails of unauthorized access to financial systems that only certain executives, like the CFO, Victor Harris, could access. The more Marcus dug, the more the pieces began to fall into place. There were multiple transfers to Crest Consulting that coincided with larger-than-usual software purchases for the company. On the surface, it looked like a routine business expense, but Marcus knew better. He had worked with these systems for years, he had built them. He could see the anomalies others might overlook. He wasn't just looking at numbers, he was looking at patterns, at small but significant inconsistencies that spoke volumes. His mind raced as he pieced together the puzzle. Crest Consulting wasn't just a random vendor, it was a front. Marcus had traced the ownership of the company, and what he found shocked him. The company was registered to Thomas Wilcox, the brother-in-law of Victor Harris, NexTech's CFO. He had always suspected that the financial dealings at NexTech were questionable, but now he had confirmation. The very people who had dismissed him, the executives who had treated him as nothing more than an outdated relic, were involved in a scheme to siphon company funds. As he sifted through more files, Marcus's fingers hovered over the keyboard, and for a brief moment, he hesitated. This was it, the moment that could change everything. But he had to be careful. The last thing he wanted was to make a rash move and expose himself prematurely. He wasn't just facing ageism and racism. He was up against a well-oiled corporate machine, one that had likely covered its tracks. If he didn't tread carefully, he could become the next scapegoat, the next person pushed aside without a second thought. He needed a plan, and it needed to be foolproof. That night, as Marcus sat in the living room with Carmen, the weight of what he had uncovered pressed heavily on him. Carmen, ever the voice of reason, could see the strain in his eyes. She had been by his side through thick and thin, supporting him through the years of late nights and long hours spent in front of a computer screen. But this was different. This wasn't just about his job, it was about justice. "Marcus," Carmen said gently, her voice full of concern, "you've been working on this for days. What are you going to do?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "I've uncovered some serious financial fraud, Carmen. This isn't just about me being fired. This goes all the way to the top. Victor Harris and Samantha Green, the CFO and the head of HR, they're all involved. But the real question is, what now? I have the evidence, but if I just send it out, they'll tear me apart. I need leverage, something that guarantees this won't get swept under the rug." Carmen placed a hand on his arm. "You can't let them get away with this. You've worked too hard, Marcus. For you, and for everyone else who's ever been overlooked or pushed aside. This isn't just about you. It's about exposing what they've done to so many people who didn't have the courage to speak up." Marcus nodded slowly. His wife was right. This wasn't just about his own redemption. It was about taking down the corruption that had festered in the company for so long. The racism, the ageism, the favoritism, it all needed to come to light. The next morning, Marcus woke up early, his mind already racing through the next steps. He couldn't just confront Victor Harris or Samantha Green directly. They had too much power, and Marcus knew they would use that power to cover their tracks. He needed to go above their heads, to the board members who had been kept in the dark. They would be his way in, but only if he could make his case without giving them an easy way to dismiss it. After a quick breakfast, Marcus drove to the nearest coffee shop, where he set up his laptop and began drafting a detailed report. He included everything: timestamps, financial discrepancies, the connections between Crest Consulting and Victor Harris, and how the inflated invoices were funneled into the company's accounts. But Marcus didn't stop there. He also included a timeline of events, showing how NexTech had quietly sidelined him, replacing his work with younger, less experienced employees who couldn't possibly understand the complexity of the systems he had built. As he wrote, Marcus's resolve solidified. He wasn't just going to sit by and watch as the company he helped build continued to falter. He wasn't going to let Richard Saunders and the others continue to profit from their deceit. This wasn't just about uncovering a corporate fraud scheme. It was about exposing the rot at the core of NexTech Solutions and making sure it never happened again. When the report was finally complete, Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment. This was his moment. The first step toward redemption. The first step toward justice. He clicked send. The morning after Marcus sent his detailed report to the NexTech board, a tension settled in his chest. He had expected some form of backlash, but he hadn't anticipated the silence that followed. The hours seemed to stretch on endlessly, and his phone remained quiet, save for a couple of text messages from Stephen, a former colleague he had mentored. Stephen was concerned about the email Marcus had sent to the board and warned him that Jason Phillips, the consultant brought in by Richard Saunders, was already moving into Marcus's old office. Marcus knew the board would be slow to act, but he wasn't prepared for the immediacy of their reaction. He knew the corrupt executives at NexTech, including Richard Saunders, would do everything they could to suppress the truth. But Marcus wasn't concerned about their empty threats. He had done his homework, and now it was time to stand his ground. It wasn't long before Marcus received his first call. The name on the screen was Richard Saunders. He almost didn't pick up, but something inside him pushed him to answer. He had made the decision to play this carefully, but he wasn't going to cower to the man who had dismissed him without a second thought. "Marcus," Richard's voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk about the email you sent." Marcus could practically hear the irritation in Richard's tone. Karen Miller, the HR manager, was likely sitting next to him, scowling at her computer screen. "I'm listening," Marcus replied calmly, his voice betraying none of the anger that simmered beneath the surface. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Richard continued, his voice becoming sharper. "But you can't just throw around accusations like this. These are serious claims, Marcus. You're risking a lawsuit, not to mention violating your confidentiality agreement." Marcus felt the weight of his decision pressing against him, but he kept his composure. "I've only pointed out facts, Richard. Facts that I've documented carefully. If you bothered to look deeper into what's been going on, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation." Silence. For a moment, Marcus thought Richard might hang up, but instead, Richard sighed. "I'm giving you one chance to take this down, Marcus," Richard said, his tone shifting into a veneer of politeness. You've been with the company long enough to know how things work. You don't want to be the one causing this kind of disruption. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He thought back to the years he had spent at NexTech, all the long hours and the sacrifices he'd made. He thought of the younger employees who had been promoted over him, who had been handed opportunities because of their youth and connections. He thought of the meetings he had sat through where his suggestions were dismissed because they didn't fit the flashy, buzzword-filled narrative Richard Saunders and Karen Miller loved to push. Now, they were trying to intimidate him, to make him back down. "I'm not the one causing disruption here, Richard," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "You and the rest of your team have been siphoning money from the company for months. You've been hiding the truth, and now it's time for everyone to see what you've been doing." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Richard spoke again, his voice now a low growl. "You're making a mistake, Marcus. You're too old to be playing these kinds of games. You should have just accepted the severance and moved on." Marcus's hand tightened around the phone. The insult was clear, and his patience was wearing thin. But he held on. He wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not now, not ever. "I'm not too old, Richard," Marcus said, his words measured and precise. "I've been doing this for over 20 years. I know exactly what's going on, and I know exactly how to bring it to light. You've underestimated me, and that's going to be your downfall." Richard's voice became venomous. "You're a fool if you think the board will take you seriously. We've already contacted legal. You've violated your agreement, and we're prepared to take action." "I'm sure you are," Marcus replied evenly. "But don't worry, Richard. I've already sent everything I have to the board, and if they don't take action, I have backup. I've made sure that this information is protected, and there are people who will hear about it no matter what. So you can threaten me all you want, but it's too late to stop this." Richard said nothing for a moment, and Marcus could almost hear him grinding his teeth. Finally, he spoke, his voice strained with frustration. "You think you're in control here, but you're not. We'll see how long this lasts, Marcus. You're out of your depth." "Maybe," Marcus said, his voice calm. "But I'm still in the game." He hung up the phone before Richard could respond, his pulse quickening. He wasn't sure how this would play out, but one thing was certain: NexTech was in chaos, and Marcus had become the storm. Just as Marcus set the phone down, his inbox chimed. It was another email from Vanessa, the HR manager. The subject line was blunt: urgent, immediate action required. Marcus opened it, his heart sinking. Vanessa had attached a letter that read like a veiled threat, demanding that he cease all communication with the company and refrain from distributing any confidential information, or else face legal repercussions. The email made it clear that NexTech wasn't just trying to silence him, they were attempting to isolate him, to cut him off from any support or future recourse. The message was a clear power move, designed to make Marcus feel alone and vulnerable. But Marcus wasn't shaken. He had expected this. It was exactly what he would have done if he were in their position, cut the head off the snake before it could strike. But Marcus wasn't just anyone. He wasn't going to back down now, not when he had everything to lose and everything to gain. He sat back, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of the battle ahead. This was only the beginning, but the game had changed. The truth was out there, and Marcus Johnson wasn't going to let it be buried. The days following his confrontation with Richard Saunders and Karen Miller were a blur of restless nights and calculated decisions. Marcus spent hours poring over documents, cross-referencing financial records, tracking vendor payments, and carefully piecing together the full extent of the fraud taking place at NexTech Solutions. Every detail had to be flawless. Every connection needed to be irrefutable. He knew that if he was going to succeed, he couldn't afford to make a single mistake. One evening, as Marcus sat in his dimly lit home office, a quiet knock at the door interrupted his concentration. It was Carmen, holding a cup of coffee. She had been his rock throughout this ordeal, offering both comfort and perspective when his emotions threatened to take over. She handed him the coffee and sat beside him, her expression a mixture of concern and support. "You've been at this for days now," Carmen said softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Are you sure you're ready to take this step?" Marcus paused, looking at the piles of documents spread out in front of him. The weight of his decision pressed down on him. He wasn't just going to expose NexTech as corrupt executives. He was putting himself in the crosshairs of a powerful corporate machine. But what was the alternative? To walk away, to let them get away with this? He couldn't. Not when so many people had been overlooked and ignored because of their age, their race, or their status. "I have to do this," Marcus said, his voice firm but weary. "I've worked for that company for 2 decades, Carmen. They've treated me like I'm invisible, like I'm disposable. But now I found something bigger, something that could change everything. Carmen nodded, her eyes full of understanding. I know you've worked hard for this. I know you've earned every bit of respect that you didn't get. But remember, Marcus, it's not just about getting revenge. It's about doing what's right. Marcus smiled faintly, feeling the support of his wife washing over him. I know, he replied. It's about justice. Later that night, Marcus made a decision. The time had come to take his findings to the board of directors, the very people who had been kept in the dark about the financial misconduct. He couldn't afford to trust Richard Saunders or Karen Miller anymore. They had shown their true colors, and the evidence he had was too important to leave in their hands. Marcus drafted an email to the board, detailing everything he had uncovered. He outlined the inflated payments to Crest Consulting, showing how the company had been using their connections to line their pockets with NexTech's money. He included the email chains, invoices, and a timeline of financial transactions that connected Victor Harris, Samantha Green, and Richard Saunders to the fraudulent activity. But Marcus didn't stop there. He knew that simply sending an email wouldn't be enough. He needed to ensure that the evidence couldn't be easily dismissed or buried. So, he attached a copy of the full report, complete with spreadsheets, financial records, and everything else that backed up his claims. He made sure that the board would see the full scope of what had happened, how NexTech had been siphoning millions of dollars from the company's funds, all while hiding behind a facade of corporate restructuring and digital transformation. Before hitting send, Marcus took a deep breath and glanced at the stack of paperwork on his desk. It was time. He was putting everything on the line, not just his reputation, but his future. There was no going back from this. With a click, he sent the email. The following day, Marcus didn't waste any time. He drove to the NexTech headquarters and parked a block away. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew he had to stay close. His investigation had rattled the company to its core, and he didn't trust that they wouldn't try to sweep everything under the rug. As he sat in his car, waiting, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Stephen, the junior analyst who had reached out to him after Marcus had been let go. Stephen had been one of the few people Marcus had trusted at NexTech. Though young, Stephen had a sharp mind and had always shown great potential. He had been one of the few who recognized Marcus's value, and Marcus had always believed in mentoring him. Marcus, we need to talk. They're in damage control mode. Richard is already denying everything. He's trying to pin this on you. Marcus's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as he read the message. He knew that Richard and the others would try to spin the situation to their advantage, but they couldn't deny the evidence. Not when it was all right there in black and white. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped out of the car, walking toward the entrance of NexTech headquarters with a sense of purpose. He was ready to face whatever came next. As Marcus entered the building, the familiar hum of the office felt eerily different. The fluorescent lights flickered above him, and the air seemed thick with tension. He walked past the desks, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that this was a pivotal moment, one that could change everything for both him and the company. At the elevator, Marcus pressed the button for the top floor, where the executive offices were located. The elevator ride was quiet, save for the soft ding as the doors opened on the executive level. He stepped out and walked toward the conference room, where he knew the board was meeting. When he entered, the room fell silent. The board members, who had always looked past him in the past, now turned their attention toward him. Robert Owens, a senior member of the board who had always respected Marcus's work, nodded toward him. There was no need for words. The evidence was already in their hands. Richard Saunders and Karen Miller sat at the far end of the table, their faces tight with anger. Victor Harris, the CFO, avoided eye contact, clearly nervous. Marcus, Robert said, his voice steady. We've reviewed the information you sent us. We're taking immediate action. You've done the right thing. Marcus nodded. He didn't need thanks or recognition. He had done what was necessary, not for personal gain, but for the truth. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a sense of relief. The truth had come to light. And now, the wheels of justice were turning. The days following Marcus's report to the board were a whirlwind of activity. NexTech Solutions was in full crisis mode. The company's once certain leadership now teetered on the edge of collapse, their web of lies and corruption beginning to unravel under the pressure of Marcus's meticulous investigation. Executives scrambled, trying to save face, but the damage was already done. Marcus, for his part, remained calm. His actions had already spoken louder than any words could. He had exposed the fraud, the kickbacks, the inflated invoices funneled through Crest Consulting. The financial damage NexTech had suffered, hidden beneath the shiny surface of innovation and digital transformation, was coming to light. And there was no going back. It had been 2 days since he'd sent the email to the board, and still, the silence hung in the air. Marcus spent his time methodically watching the developments unfold. He knew this was far from over. He was waiting, not for a victory, but for the opportunity to ensure that justice was not just a momentary reaction but a lasting change. The phone call he had been expecting finally came late in the afternoon as he was sitting in his home office, reviewing more documents. The name on the caller ID sent a ripple of recognition through him. Robert Owens. Robert, a seasoned member of the board, was one of the few who had always respected Marcus. A few months ago, Marcus would have considered him just another executive, part of the same corporate system. But now, he knew Robert was the kind of person who valued integrity and transparency, not just results. Marcus, Robert's voice came through the line, calm yet heavy with significance. I've reviewed the entire report, and I've spoken with the other board members. There's no denying the scale of what's happened here. You were right to expose it. Marcus's breath caught in his chest, a mixture of relief and anticipation flooding over him. What happens now? We're moving forward with a full investigation, starting with Victor Harris, Samantha Green, and Richard Saunders. As of now, they've all been suspended, pending legal action, Robert replied. I can't promise how this will play out, but what you did took courage, Marcus. And you've shown us something that was hidden for too long. Marcus let out a slow breath. For the first time in days, the tight knot in his chest loosened. His hands, which had been trembling with the weight of what he had started, felt steady now. He was no longer the man discarded for his age, his race, or his perceived obsolescence. He was the one who had brought the truth to the surface. But as much as he wanted to feel victorious, Marcus knew this wasn't just about him. This was about more than exposing a few corrupt executives. This was about justice for the countless employees who had been overlooked, underestimated, and pushed aside, just like he had been. This was about creating a culture of fairness, of respect, and most importantly, accountability. A week passed before Marcus received another call. This time, it was from Carmen. Her voice was filled with excitement, but also a hint of disbelief. Marcus, you won't believe this, she said, her tone tinged with both relief and joy. I've been talking to some of the people who still work at NexTech. Word's gotten around that you've not only exposed the fraud, but that they're finally making real changes. They're going to institute a diversity and inclusion program, and they're offering you a new position. Marcus could feel the weight of her words. A new position? Yeah, Carmen said. They want you to come back. They're offering you the role of Chief Information Security Officer, overseeing all tech security and ethics compliance. They're even giving you the power to veto budget decisions for technology and security. The board knows they need someone like you at the helm if they're going to rebuild trust. Marcus was silent for a long moment, processing everything Carmen had said. It was exactly the type of role he had always envisioned for himself, but now, with everything that had transpired, he wasn't sure if he could return to NexTech, a company that had discarded him so easily, only to call him back when the weight of their mistakes was too much to bear. Do you think I should go back? Marcus asked quietly. Carmen's response was immediate, without hesitation. It's up to you. But I think you should consider it. Not because you owe them anything, but because you've earned it. You've spent your career building this company, Marcus. You fought for justice, not just for yourself, but for everyone who was pushed out, ignored, or mistreated. That night, Marcus sat alone in his office, reflecting on his journey. He thought of his years at NexTech, the long hours, the difficult projects, the sacrifices. He thought of the people who had dismissed him, those who had treated him as invisible. He thought of how he had fought against ageism, racism, and the corporate culture that prized youth over experience, flash over substance. But he also thought of the opportunity ahead. If he accepted the position, it wouldn't be about reclaiming what he had lost. It would be about building something better. He would have the power to ensure that no one else had to endure what he had endured, that no one else would be pushed aside simply because of their age, race, or status. In the morning, Marcus made his decision. He walked into his office and picked up the phone. He called Robert Owens and accepted the position. But he wasn't just accepting a job, he was accepting the responsibility that came with it. The responsibility to make NexTech a company that would respect all of its employees, regardless of their age, race, or background. Marcus, I'm glad to hear you'll be joining us again, Robert said, his voice warm and sincere. This company needs someone like you, someone who understands what it means to fight for what's right. Thank you, Robert, Marcus replied, his voice steady. Let's make sure it's a company that gets it right this time. Over the next few months, NexTech Solutions underwent significant changes. Marcus worked tirelessly to reshape the company's security protocols, but he also implemented diversity and inclusion initiatives aimed at creating a culture of respect and fairness. Under his leadership, the company rebuilt its reputation, regaining the trust of both its employees and the public. As Marcus stood in his new office, overlooking the skyline of Atlanta, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had done what he set out to do, not for personal gain, but for justice. He had been cast aside, but he had come back stronger, not to reclaim what was taken from him, but to ensure that no one would have to face the same fate he had. Justice had been served, and Marcus Johnson, once overlooked and dismissed, had become the man who had saved the company he had helped build.